between a list and a tuple. And so in your book, they talk about those differences on page 133. So if we'll start there, we'll take a look at some of the content there. On the page 132 is a methods. So there's all different kinds of methods that you can use in there. One that you may have found useful that isn't in this list is a dot index method. So you might even scribble that in for whoever grabs your textbook when you sell it later. So there is another method called a dot index that allows me to get the value back. And so I'm going to post some samples of code for last week. In addition, that discussion board says, hey, post your last week's assignment, and what I want you to do is look at those, what other people have done. Does that give you some ideas? And I think what that'll do is you'll see what other people have done, and it'll hopefully spark some of that creativity, and you'll say, hey, I could make this easier or simpler or quicker, or instead of having to have a set of, is the answer equal to Y, is it equal to capital Y or capital yes or no, you could do some like the upper and lower. You could slice off, which is kind of a handy way to do it. You could slice off just the first letter of their response and then combine that with the dot upper or dot lower, and then you have one comparison to make instead of several. So one of the things we do a lot is we do things like high scores. We do some other things where these tuples and these lists are a really handy way to do that. So on page 134, 135, we start looking at can we nest those together? And some of you last week actually looked ahead and did this. In other words, instead of a parallel array, you did a nested array where you put two items together inside of our inside. So let's look at that and look at those ideas really quickly here. So the program we're working at is a high scores program. And again, one of the things that I think is important with any of these is we put these inside of that idea of a menu structure. And so for a while, until we get to something even better when we start looking at functions and modules, I think that this is really a great way that we can do these modules. So let's take a look on page 134, and they start looking at nested sequences and how we can do those. So we're going to create a new file. File new, if I can find it there. Do you guys want me to share this screen out to you? Would that be helpful? Or can you see it better? I don't think it interferes with it, so let's make sure. All right, teacher content, yes. I hate their little flyout banner. Stop. There we go. Let's see if I can show this as windowed. Does that give you this screen here, the untitled? Do you see the high scores screen? It should be sent out to. It may be not everybody has it on their computer sitting there for whatever reason. You think that'll work? All right. Either way, I don't care. I just want to give you guys some ability here to work with this. All right. So we're going to put in a couple of scores, and so we're going to use a menu structure. And so we're going to create a data structure. And so I'm going to call this one high scores. And we put scoring things in a lot. So we use that, and we know we're going to do some games in the future. And so if I'm going to have score, I'm going to have one I'm going to call scores. And I'm going to set it up blank to start with, and I'm going to use my brackets. So by putting in the brackets, what kind of data structure is that? Is that a tuple or is that a list? So if I did it with these instead, what does that mean? So that's a critical difference you will need to know. And if I did the curly brackets, so which one is a list item? The square brackets. Which one is the parentheses? That's our unchangeable tuple, and then those brackets become a dictionary item. So that's how Python can tell the difference on a lot of these. So I'm going to put everything inside of a while loop again, and I'm going to use choice does not equal, and I'm going to do this 0 again. So very similar to our structure we did the other day, we're going to create this loop, and that loop will run as long as they don't enter 0. To start this loop, I'm going to use choice, and I'm going to set it equal to our key phrase none. And that just says there's nothing in it, it's blank. So by default, this will run one time. So I'm going to print out, and if you use the triple quotes, you can print out high score menu. And those triple quotes allow you to kind of have this sequence. So I'm going to put in 0, and that's equal to quit. 1. Oh, choice. Oh. So 1, we're going to put over here is equal to list scores. And 2, add a score. So in this program, we're going to allow you to put in items. So here we have a menu item. And so now we're going to use the same way we did that before. So just like we did before, we have to make sure you're at the right indent level, and that's one of the keys in here. So we're going to get choice is equal to input, please choose a menu option. And so that will put that in there. And notice we don't need to do the INT because we're okay with it being, a just a value in a string, because we're just going to make a quick comparison to it. And so once again, we're going to do a couple of them. So we're going to do if choice is equal to 0, we can print out a statement that says thanks for playing, whatever you want to do. Thanks, later, Gator, whatever you want to put in. So that gives us our if choice, and I always want to make sure I have an else in there. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in because if everything else goes wrong, so if we don't get the right choice, so I'm going to put an else in there, and that else I'm going to say, I don't think we have that option. And you could mirror back what they typed in even, but I'm just going to leave it as blank as possible. And then at the very end of my program, I'm going to have my input statement. And again, that input statement holds it open, and I want it at the outermost level, so the base level of this program. So now I have my choices for 0, and I have my catch-all, no matter what else they did. I need to put in my else, or my LFs. So LF choice equals 1. I'm going to do something. And for 1, it says list the scores. And so I'm going to do a print So I'm going to fancy it up and put something in there. And then I can even do, oh, I forgot to end it. Print. Now, we're going to have to think about what we're going to put in there. And usually on a high score, what do you have in there? Just the score, or do you have anything else? So if you think back to those video arcade games that you played when you were kids and you're running into them, what did it have with the high score? Almost always. A name of some sort. So we're going to actually think about this data structure and this idea of how we can do paired values. So I'm going to leave this print open for now. We know we're going to print those out. So I think it would be helpful if we actually did the how to add a score first. So LF choice equals 2. So in other words, we're going to add a score. So the first thing we're going to do is we need a value for name. And we're going to set name equal to an input statement. Please enter the player's name. And so now we have a name, and then we need a score. Now, notice up here, we called this scored. Up down here is score. Those are not the same variable names, just so you see that. So in this case, we're going to put in input. What is the score you want to input? Now, I'm going to do one more thing with this one. So because we know that that input is a string, and I may want to eventually take this score and change it. So I may want to modify it, list them in order. It would be better for me if those were in there as a numeric value. And so I am going to do an int, so integer at the very beginning, and wrap that whole thing in an integer. And then it's going to give me an integer value of whatever they put in. Now, the downside to that is if they put in a value as a ABC, it may error out. And so we'll look at how we can possibly fix that. So I'm going to put in a couple of things, and I am going to combine these into one unit. And I'm going to combine them by passing them into one variable. And so here I'm just going to call it entry just for no other reason. And I am going to pass into that both values of score and name. And so that's going to put those together into score and name. And in fact, if I printed now entry, and we can do that, you can say print entry, we can see what would happen. Well, I'm going to put a pound sign there in front of that to start with. So back on page 132, I think it is, they give us some methods to add values. And the one we're going to use to start with, I want to put things into my scored file. And into that list, I want to put in values. So I am going to use scored.append, because that append allows me to add a value, and it says it puts it at the end of it, and that's fine, because we don't have anything in there to start with. And I'm going to pass in the values for entry. Okay. And then I'm going to do one more fun thing. I'm going to take scored dot, let's see if I can drag that up a little bit. I'm going to take scored dot sort. So another value we have in there. I'm going to sort them, but normally what it does is it sorts them from smallest to largest. In high scores, we really want to do that from highest scores down to lowest. And so the way we do that, if I look at sort, I'm going to have to set it to reverse, and so I'm going to say reverse is equal to true. And notice it becomes a key phrase. The other thing I can do in there is remember those slices and those way we can take data and manipulate it around. I'm going to say scored equals scored. And I only want to keep the top 3 scores. And to do that, I'm going to do a slice, and I'm going to do the top 3. And so it sorts them by size, and then we're going to chop off everything except the top 3 items. Oh. So we may even say keeps the top 3, and you could certainly change that. You could even add a menu item in there to say how many scores do you want to keep. All right, so if we can do that, now we can put scores in. Now we can think about how do I print those scores out. And so I'm going to do a print statement. And I'm going to say name, because I'm going to put a header on there. I'm going to use my friend the /t to tab it over. And I'm actually going to put 2 of them in there. So I've got a header that's going to print. And then I'm going to use a for loop. And because I've already created down here this little catch-all variable called entry, I'm going to use entry again. For entry in scored. And then I am going to say score, comma, name equals entry. So now I'm taking them back out of that. So in other words, I'm taking that value entry and I'm passing it back into score and name. Print name, comma, and I want my /t/t. So that just simply tabs it over. Score. So score name, blah, blah, blah. Make sure that it closes. All right, so a couple of things we want to make sure when you do something like this. Make sure that you're looking at them correctly. So score name. Down here we have score name. So if you flip those, you're going to get a result that doesn't look quite right. And so now, let's see how horrible my typing is. And I'm going to save this to, I don't know, high score 2. So some way we can score. And what do I have wrong with that? I probably have something weird there. Let me delete that. Oh, because I put that in there. Okay. So high score. All right. Let's try that again. All right. So it pops up over. Let me drag this over. It pops up and says, here's my score. And one of the things I'm looking at is, all right, I want to make sure it works. And then I'll make notes of little weird things. So menu option, I want an extra space over here so it looks right. But right now I'm going to say, let's see what happens if I put 1. List the scores. You wanted the high scores, you got them. Oh, there's clearly no scores in there. So 2, I'm going to try and see if it'll actually let me enter there. So Mark, and he got 100. I don't even know what sport we're in. We're just creating a, and so now we're going to see if they list correctly. And it does. It says Mark, score of 100. So let's list some additional scores in there. So we're going to add a couple more scores. Except, does it work? Maybe there's a problem with my code here. Choose a menu option. All right, so I want to add a score. And we're going to put in another player's name. We're going to call Melissa. And she scored 101. And so we're going to do another one for add a score. And Carla, and she got a 104. And I'm going to add in a 4th score. So we know that there should be 4 in there, right? So we're going to call this Bill. And Bill got an 89. So it should have created a list for me of 4 items, right? Except except we're trimming it off to the top 3 every time. So let's see if that really worked. So we're going to hit 1. Now, I see a couple of issues with this. So notice Melissa's name was long enough to get to that tab stop and forced it out. But what happened to poor Bill's score? It's just gone. It did actually seem to work to chop that off. So that part works pretty well. So we have some cleanup to do, but this is a handy way we could keep track of some items. That idea of a nested sequence. So if I look back at last week's program, this would have been an interesting way to do it also if you looked ahead. So the book goes into a lot of detail about how to do those and how to work with that idea. So on page 138, so 138, they talk about something called a shared reference. So in this idea of a shared reference, so they show you how to go through, and they're creating a list item called Mike, and they've also referenced it and added it, so we've had several different name references to it. And so what we're showing is we can actually use that idea that we can do a couple of pieces all very similar. So make sure you read through there. Sometimes it's very handy if we assign a different reference to a list or a tuple, or if we even copy that entire list or tuple. And you're going to see we do that with a couple of our programs. Page 141, we talked about creating, and we created kind of a very short version of the dictionary list and a Geek translator program. So make sure that it's in there. So there are some, on page 147, there's some things you might want to look at for a dictionary requirements. So the keys have to be unique, values do not. So just like in a dictionary, you can't have 2 entries that have exactly the same name, but you could have 2 entries that have the same value in there. All right, so what we want to do today, kind of our big piece to finish out, is we're going to create a hangman game. So we need to think about hangman and what goes on in hangman. So I'm going to drop this, and I'm going to create a new blank file. And so I'm just going to jot down some notes about what a hangman looks like. So we all know how to play hangman. If anybody doesn't, we can explain it. But you get X number of choices, right? So generally, how many chances do you get in hangman? It's been a long time since you guys have played hangman, apparently. So when you draw the little stick figure guy, how many little pieces appear on him? So, yeah, so it depends. It's one of those kids games you go, man, that sounds really simple, and then you start thinking about it, you go, well, maybe it's not as simple as what you would think. But we created our Jumble program, so we're going to use some things out of our Jumble program, and we're going to look at a couple of other items. So we have a lot of ASCII art in this one, and so I am going to steal the ASCII art because I do not want to recreate it, nor do we have time to do it, and my typing skills would make this painful. But we have to make some game decisions about how it's going to work. So first thing we're going to do, name, whatever I put in there, and we're going to call this one Hangman. So to make it a little more exciting, we're going to add some graphics, and so we're going to create a constant. So the constant we're going to use, and a tuple works really well for a constant because we know we can't change it. And we're going to create a constant called hangman. And if I can get the little cursor wheel to work, I'm going to steal this all the ASCII art in the world. And notice what we've done. So we have a hangman. So it starts with the noose. There's a little piece of his body, more of the body. So we don't have to create that all on our own, thank goodness. So we can use what's already there. Quite frankly, you could put in the values and say, hey, I'm getting closer to dying, whatever you want to do. We're just using them as outputs to see how many there are. So this just keeps track of our status. So we have a couple of other things we want to put in there. So generally, if we have a constant, we use this nomenclature of capital letters. Python really doesn't care. Python does not have a constant data type. Other languages do. So we just use the convention of all capital letters saying, we're not going to change this. It's going to stay the same in our entire program. So we have a couple of other things we were going to put in there. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so it's not right on top of the recording button. And I'm going to use one called max wrong. And max wrong we're going to set equal to the length of hangman, except we're going to do -1 because the last hangman symbol means that you've actually lost the game. We're also going to have to find some words, and we'll put those in as so we're going to create a couple of words. So I always like to use Python just because I can remember it. Python. Maybe bicep. Newspaper. So I'm just going to put a couple of words in there just so we can make sure that our program works. The reality is we try to make these scalable so that this game, we can extend it nearly forever. So you could keep adding words in there. And certainly after we get the skeleton of this done, no pun intended since we're playing the hangman game, but so we now need to come up with some variables. And so I'm just going to we have our constants, now we're going to have some variables and set them up. And so I like to put in a lot of comments, and I don't always when I'm typing here because I'm trying to talk and type, and we know that that goes bad anyway. So I'm going to set one up to word equals, and I'm going to use our friend random.choice, and I'm going to take it out of that one we just did, words. And I have to have it all capitalized. So we're getting a random word out of this list, and it doesn't matter how many items are in there. We're setting one value to word in there. And so that random.choice, the same one we used on our jumble, is going to pick one of those randomly for us. Well, that part makes sense. So we have a couple of other variables we're going to set up initially. So we know we have that value of what it's going to be to start with. So we're going to use one called so far. So it's a progress check as we go. And I am going to set that equal to dashes. But I'm also going to do this fun thing that we figured out we can do with variables. I'm going to multiply it times the length of our word. So what that's going to do is if there are 8 characters in the word we picked, it's going to just create dashes across there. So you can't tell what it looks like, but you know how many characters it is long. I'm also going to create one called wrong, and I'm going to set that equal to 0 to start with. and I'm going to create one called used. Because I want to create a list of all of the items that we use. Because we want to make it changeable, I'm going to make that a list and not a tuple. So notice up here, we're not changing this list, so we made that a tuple. Handy way to keep track of it. This used, because we are going to do something with it, we're going to change it and add to that list. We're going to leave that as a list instead. So once again, we're going to create our entire program inside of a loop. So we can run pieces of our program. Let me scroll down a little bit. And so we're going to do a while loop again. And so while wrong is less than max wrong. So in other words, we add up wrong. Here's our scoring utility. So each time this loops, we're going to add one value to wrong. And as long as it's less than max wrong, or the length of our chosen word minus 1, this loop is going to continue. But we have one more thing we want to check for. We want to also make sure that if it gets the right word, if you've guessed all the letters in that word, that it also exits that loop. And so we have a variable up there called so far, and we do not want that equal to word. So as long as we haven't exceeded all of our guesses and we haven't guessed the correct word, then this loop is going to run. And this loop, we can print out some interesting information. So we can print out all different kinds of things. So we could print out so to this point you have used these letters. And maybe I might even want to put it down a line, whatever I want to do there. And I can print out the value for used. I don't need to, I need a quote mark in there. So, and if I just print out used, it's going to print out whatever is in that list item or that tuple. So I can print out the ones that we've used, and I can even print your word so far is so far. And so it will print out both of those. So we've got a couple of pieces in there that we're looking at. And we can also even print this item. So we've created all those. We want to know which one we're at so far, right? And so right now, we don't know which one we're at. Because we're at the beginning of that loop. We don't know how many times it's ran. But we do have a counter that may tell us that. So if I look down here, so max wrong equals length. And so we're adding in wrong, correct? Every time that's going to go up 1. So it starts at 0. Well, here's our position 0. So in other words, we haven't missed one. Here's position 1. Here's position 2. So we have the ability to print out our graphic. And so we could even print out our graphic, and we do that, print. So that's a constant, so hangman is what we called that variable that's got all our ASCII art in it. And if I use the wrong, it'll tell me then how many choices. You could eliminate, honestly, that graphic art if you really wanted to, and just print, something else, your score of 10. But it's just kind of a handy way to actually show you what's going on. Right now, we haven't guessed anything. And so I could even run this program, and we'll call that and I try to run it, and it gives me an error. Oh. And it gives me an error. It says random is not defined. So if I see that error, what have I forgotten to do? What might that be? That looks right. It says random.choice. Oh. So somewhere up here at the beginning of our game, we always need to, if we're going to use those random functions, import random. Now, why they don't have that just as a default library, since so many things depend on it, I don't know. But now if I run that, oh. Now, the reason it's doing that, let's think about that. Right now, I created an infinite loop, and it's just displaying your word so far is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so it's got the right letters. But we don't have any way to change that values that it's based on, do we? So it's always going to be true. This up here is always going to be true, and it's going to run that forever. We don't have any way to stop it. So the first thing we need to do then is we need to get a guess from our user. So guess is a really great term, and we're going to assign it an input. Please enter your guess of what the word is. Got it. Well, that's not too tough. Now, the other thing we're going to do just to make comparisons easier is, if you notice, we have all of our words uppercase here. So we're going to do guess equals guess dot upper. So we convert whatever they type in into an upper guess. If I put in that, because it's a void function, I have to hit my upper and lower. All right, so now it's allowing me to change. That part's really good. So now we want to figure out if their guess, so they're putting in one character, right? If their character is correct. Is there a way we could use the slices we had before to slice that off to one character? So even if they type in 12 characters, it takes the first one. So there's some things we could do. So, but we're going to take their word that they're going to just put in one character. So I want to see if that character exists. So if guess in word. So it takes the word we chose, it looks for it. If it's true, then we could print out so we know that it's true. Now they get something that happens. So we have to do a couple of things in here now. So we're going to set up a little bit of a little loop here. And that loop inside of here is going to go back and change what our word looks like. If we guess the right letter, now it should show up. So I'm going to create a blank variable called new, and I'm going to set it equal to blank. So we have we know that it doesn't have anything in there. And I'm going to create a loop. And normally I'm very descriptive. For something like a for loop, I works really well. Just as a quick variable, we're going to use it. For I in range, and that range we're going to do is the length of word. So in other words, it's going to run from 0 to however long that word is. So if it's 6 letters long, it's going to go 0 through 5. And then we're going to nest inside of here an if statement. So if guess is equal to word at position I. So in other words, we're working our way through that word one letter at a time to see if that guess is in. We know it's in the word somewhere. We don't know where. And so we're stepping one letter at a time through there. And so if it happens to be in that position, So we're using this I to step our way through all of those. Then we're going to say new, because that's our blank variable we're using, is equal to new plus guess. So in other words, we're replacing that letter one step at a time. If it's not, we're going to use our else statement, and we're going to say new equals new plus so far at that same position of I. So we're either going to replace it with the existing value, or we're going to replace it with the new value, one of the two. So that's what that does. And then at the end of this, at the end of our loop, all the way back out, so it's ran through that entire for loop of however many characters, we're going to take so far, and we're going to assign it the value that we just created. So we're going to create a brand new variable called new, swap out the letters that we hopefully have just guessed, and we're going to pass that into so far. So we're going to come back out to our outside indent range here of this if, so we're still in this loop, and we're going to put an else clause in there. And the else clause, we're going to just do a print statement, and we're going to say loser, that isn't in the word. So the other piece that happens when we don't get the right word is we want to increment our wrong count. So we're going to say wrong equals wrong plus 1. So if you don't guess the right word or a letter in the word, holy cow, now we're going to add a scoring in there for you. So we know that we can stop however many words you have, and we can fix that problem. So now that while loop is running, and as long as those conditions work, this should actually work. What it doesn't do is at the end now tell us anything. So we're going to create another if loop or if statement. So if wrong is equal to max wrong. So when that's an interesting typing fail there. So if it's equal to max wrong, in other words, you've failed out of the top of this loop and you've got so many wrong letters in there that you can't win. You lose. If they didn't lose, so we're just making this kind of a short, sweet little thing. And then just so I can hold it open, I'm going to put a blank input statement in there. Now, this is not very cleaned up, and we'll see what actually happens. So there's not spacing, there's not a lot of content, but hopefully the skeleton of this will work, and we'll see if it works. Yes, we're going to save it. So, where's my little mouse? All right, so we're going to see. Oh, I wanted that, and I want it to be open. So to this point, you have used these letters. And it shows, no, I haven't used any, right? So we could probably clean that up a little bit. And your word is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my guess for this word is, I'm going to guess a P. And I want to see if it works. Because I'm pretty sure that's Python, right? I think that's the only 5-letter word I have. Yup, that is in the word. So this far you have used these letters. Oh, interesting. So we may have to look and see. Because up here, it doesn't tell me that I used P, but it shows up in my word. So I'm going to guess a word that's wrong in there, or a letter. So U doesn't happen to be in Python. Oh. So we seem to have a problem somewhere up there printing out my list, right? So we'll have to examine and see what happens. So let's see what happens if I fail this. So notice I'm getting more and more developed. Please enter the guess of your word is why. Loser, that isn't the word. You lose. So it kicked me out. It failed. But we seem to have a problem in here of some sort. And so we need to sort out what that is. So up here, it should print out our list of words, right? So you have used these letters, okay? And we created this list here called used. So what are we not doing in here? Is there something we're not doing? So do we have anywhere in there that we are creating that used file? Do we have anything in there that says appended in there or anything? So while guess, so we have a couple of things that we're missing in here. So guess equals guess.upper, we got that part, and we check for it. So maybe we need to do one more thing in here. So I know I need to put in used.append, and I'm going to put in my value for guess, right? And so now if I run this, comes up in the other window again, of course. So now if I put this in here, let's see if it works. And I'm going to put in the value for P. Oh, look at that. Now it says I have a P there. I'm going to do S, T, Y. So now it's actually constructing those and doing that. But does it have any way to check if we have the same value twice? So I'm going to put P in again. Oh. So notice this. It has P here and it has P there. It's like having puppies. There's P's everywhere now. All right, so we need to figure out a way to come back in here and check if we've already used that word or used that letter. So I'm going to close that. And so there's a couple of different ways we could do it. Couple of different ways. I'm going to do this, I think. So I want to use a while loop. So I'm going to check. So while guess is in used, so in other words, I'm going to check, have I used that already? And if it is, so in other words, this loop is only going to run if that is in there before. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it in there at that indent. Oop, move that one over one. And I'm going to add a print statement. Look up at the used values. You already used that letter. So now we're just going to check. So we get their guess. So we could make this even easier. We could do all kinds of things, but this way works. There's probably some more elegant ways to do it. And then if their guess hasn't been used, then it's going to put that in there. Only if that guess is used when it hits this line. So while guess is in used, then should it work. So let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh, drag back over again. So my word is something, and I'm going to put in T. and it says, all right, here's my used values, and I'm going to put in T again. And I don't think you can see it. It says, please enter your guess of what the word is. Please look at the used values. You already used that letter. So I'm going to put in T again, and it's going to argue with me every time. But hopefully that will work for us and solve our issues. So now we've got a couple of pieces in there. So we're taking in inputs, we're changing a list, and we're checking to see if we win this game. Now, again, there's a lot of cleanup to do on here. This was a rough, real quick run. So there's a lot of these print statements that we would want to change. Most of your inputs. So here, just that simple colon space makes life a lot easier. At least it does to me. It makes it look better. So we could go through and clean that up. And then there's some other pieces. If I were going to do this, I'd start thinking about, now I've got the bare bones to work. How can I clean up that input, for example? Could I set that input to guess equal guess slice or something? Could I do that? Yeah. I could change those in a lot of different ways. So we know we can slice, so we could do the :1, and you could get just that outside piece. You could do all kinds of things that way. You could even do a check. You could make a list. So one of the things very similar to this while guess and used, you could make a list up here called alphabet. And you could put in A, B, etc. And you could actually do a very similar thing to that to make sure that they put in only letters of the alphabet. Because right now, let me clear that out so you don't see it. And again, it pops up over there. There's probably nothing in here that's going to stop it for that first guess if I put in a 4. Yeah. We know it's probably not a letter in there, but that looks kind of dumb if we're putting in, we know those aren't going to be there. So you could even restrict that input, and you could do that, a very similar structure, a while loop. So in other words, you're creating something that will hopefully be very robust. So everything that you think some user is going to do, they're going to do something equally as dumb. So you have all the tools. So this week's assignment, if I remember correctly, new file, pops it over there. So this week's assignment, you're going to create a program to start with 15 values, I believe, isn't it? Sort them or scramble them. Oh. Scramble values. Add new words. Do we have the ability to delete words out of there? No, we probably should. It doesn't take that much more to do that. But so you're going to start with, so you're going to have a list of words of some sort. If I am going to create a list of words and I am going to change them, do I want a list, do I want a tuple, or do I want a dictionary? A dictionary? Okay. The other day? So in this case, you only have a list of words. They're not paired with anything else. The dictionary is a great idea if you're trying to pair them. So a tuple, can we change a tuple? Now, I mean, we can work around that restriction. We can copy it into a new tuple, and append them and do different things. But tuples have some limitations. So I would say if we're going to do this, we're probably going to use a list, not a tuple. So again, the only difference when I create them, I use parentheses to create a tuple, square brackets to create a list. And so I'm going to put in my list of words. So I don't know if I'm going to get to 15, but I'll get somewhere. All right. So there's our list of words. So we have a set of words. So can I scramble them some way? Is there an easy way to scramble those? So we have the tools that you had in your word jumble, and you could apply those to items in a list instead of individual letters. So you could do that. But are there other ways to randomize or scramble a list? Well, there's lots of resources. We have our book. We have the entire World Wide Web out there. Are there ways to scramble a list of items? So I might, if I were doing this program, I might look at how to do that to start with. I know I can do that append to add items. That one seems pretty easy. So I know I have this structure. So I could append things. So, go back over here. So I could do something like this, append. So I can create my menu structure and start working on that. But how would I scramble them? Well, I probably, if anything, it says, I'm going to probably import random. And almost all of our programs, we use random. But is there a way to scramble those? Because I'm going to set up my menu. So that might be the first thing. So while choice, and you want to set up choice is not equal to 0, which is our kind of our handy menu item. And in fact, you can copy some of those items, that structure, and utilize it again if you wanted to. So I'm going to set up my menu. While choice is not equal to blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to take some of the same things we had in our earlier program, wherever I have it hidden up here. Is that it? No. Nope. So maybe I'd look at my high score game and I see how did I do that menu. And I said, oh, well, while choice is not equal to 0, all right. So I could probably even copy some of that over, right? That sets up a very easy way to do that. And I have a menu item. So I'm even going to copy this. Just because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Now we know it's inside a while loop, so we got to go to that first indent. And I could change this menu. So quit doesn't do anything differently. And so I could even grab the next couple of lines down. Get the input from them while choice equals 0. Thanks for playing, whatever you want to change that to. So in this case, I know that 1 is going to actually be what? Scramble our list. And so maybe 2 then is print list, and in which case we need a 3 for three would be add to the list. Kind of starts looking like something we've already done. This seems very familiar. That we've done something like this very similarly, right? Would you need a 4 for what? If you want to put that in there, yeah. You could have a 4 for delete item in list. And if we look back at like the inventory and some of these other programs, we've got all the tools to do that. So we could set up our menu then and set up all of our items and get those put in there. So you could have your LF choice equals 1. What's going to happen? And you could put some comments in there. So how do we scramble a list? And we're going to leave that one for you to find. There are literally hundreds of ways to do it. Our book lists a couple when you go through there. You could create something very similar to the jumble. I will say that there are some even easier ways to do it than that you can scramble that list. Now, when you add a word, choice equals 3. So when you add a word, one of the things you need to do on here is you need to make sure you check to see if the word is in the list already. Do we have the ability to do that? Yeah. Yeah. We just did it with our hangman game. So you can build this structure and then start filling in these individual pieces here. So all of our choices, so I'm almost always going to put these into a menu. And then I can go through and make sure all of my menu items work. So how do I scramble a list? Or maybe I should say this, and maybe that would be a key phrase. How do I make a list random? And there are some easy ways to do that. So what I want to remind you of, so week 11, do Sunday the 31st. I know everybody's got a busy, crazy weekend, but you can get it done. On your discussion board, make sure you've looked at both choices for discussion boards this week because there are 2 of them to participate in. So the majority of your points for this do not come from posting your own code. In fact, I believe the rubric I'm using has 2 of the points come from posting your own code. The rest of the points come from constructively commenting and adding suggestions to what your fellow users have done. And in fact, if we look at it already, we can see that several people have posted about some of their code. So weird that we have the 2 Baileys posting first, but notice that you can see that what they did, and then we have comments and different things. So this really is a learning exercise. Make time for them. I know we all hate discussion boards. Just the term discussion boards, it's kind of like statistics class. If we really said we're going to counting class, it's probably not as bad. When you use the term statistics, suddenly we get this mental block and we think they're horrible. So make sure you do those 2. We don't have any quizzes until the final. So if you're not doing the homework and you're not doing the discussion boards, you're not getting any points. And not getting points leads to not great grades. All right, so you really do have all the pieces in here to do this. So make sure you go through and you're working on that. Do not wait till Sunday at 4 o'clock. If you do that, that will probably make you a sad camper. Yes?
When you say scramble the values, does that mean we're having it print out, so we're having it randomized like the order of
The order of them, correct.
and then when we do
Correct. Well, if you haven't re-scrambled it, it'd be the same as what you did before, if you set it up this way. You can take those instructions I have to mean a lot of different things. So your program should look individualized in this one as we start writing it. So you can do that however you would like. And again, if you want to do it, we did the a scramble, that word jumble. You can use some code very similar to the way we scrambled a word to scramble an entire list if you want to. But I would probably do a little investigation if I were you. All right, any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Going close?